"He has been poisoned," Dr. Vera Coleman said. Her voice cut through the loud music of the ballroom like a knife. Michael Brooks stood at the center of the room, surrounded by gold decorations and elite guests. He had just finished a toast for his birthday when his face suddenly turned a terrifying shade of purple. The silver goblet fell from his hand, spilling red wine across the white marble floor. Michael gripped the edge of a table, but his legs gave out. He collapsed hard, his body twitching as thick white foam bubbled at his mouth. Dr. Coleman rushed to his side, pushing through the shocked crowd. The guests stood frozen in confusion and horror, watching the most powerful man in the city crumble in seconds. Vanessa, his wife, stood nearby with a look of fake terror, while the doctor desperately checked his pulse. This nightmare felt like a curse from his past. 10 years ago, Michael lost his first wife and all 3 of his children in a horrific car accident. He spent a decade alone, living like a ghost in a massive mansion. He thought his heart was dead until he met Vanessa. He finally let her in, trusting her with his empire and his life. He believed he was finally safe from the pain. He never suspected that his new wife and his best friend were waiting for the perfect moment to strike. This story is a powerful reminder that money can buy a grand house, but it can never buy a loyal heart. We often think our enemies are far away, but sometimes the person sharing your table is the one secretly planning your downfall. I'm Chizzy, and if you value stories that speak the truth about life and loyalty, welcome to TalkToChizzy. Hit that subscribe button and join our family today. As you watch Michael's journey, ask yourself, who can you truly trust when the lights go out? The grand ballroom of the Brook Mansion was a sea of gold and black. Huge crystal lights hung from the ceiling, making the diamond jewelry of the guests sparkle. It was Michael Brooks' 48th birthday, and no expense had been spared. The air was thick with the smell of expensive perfume and the sound of a live jazz band playing smooth, upbeat music. Waiters in white gloves moved through the crowd, carrying trays of the finest food. The guests were the most powerful people in the city: judges, politicians, and wealthy business owners. Everyone wanted a moment of Michael's time. Michael stood near the center of the room, looking every bit like the king of the underworld. He wore a custom black suit that fit him perfectly. Even though he was smiling and shaking hands, his eyes remained sharp. He had spent years building his empire, and he knew that in his world you always had to be alert. "Happy birthday, Michael," said Daniel Hayes, stepping forward with a wide grin. Daniel was Michael's oldest friend. He slapped Michael on the shoulder. "Another year of being the man everyone fears and respects." Michael laughed, a rare sound that reached his eyes. "I couldn't have done it without a loyal team, Daniel." Nearby, Vanessa Brooks watched her husband. She looked stunning in a long red silk gown. To the guests, she looked like a devoted and proud wife. She moved through the room with grace, making sure every guest had a full glass. But every few minutes, her gaze would snap back to Michael. She wasn't just watching him, she was tracking his every move. "You look deep in thought, my love," Michael said as Vanessa approached him. He reached out and touched her hand. "I just want everything to be perfect for you," she whispered, her voice as smooth as velvet. She signaled to a waiter who was carrying a special silver tray. On the tray sat a single ornate goblet filled with deep red wine. Vanessa took the goblet and held it out to her husband. The light caught the dark liquid inside. Around them, the guests began to quiet down, sensing that a toast was coming. "To your health and our future," Vanessa said softly. Michael took the cold silver glass from her hand. He felt the weight of it, looking at his wife and his best friend standing by his side. He felt lucky. For the first time in 10 years, he felt like he had a real life again. He raised the glass high as the crowd cheered. Michael tilted his head back and began to drink. The red wine tasted bitter, but Michael didn't think twice. He swallowed the liquid and smiled at the cheering crowd. Then the world began to tilt. A sharp, burning pain exploded in his chest, and his lungs felt like they were filling with lead. The silver goblet slipped from his numb fingers and crashed onto the marble floor. Red wine splashed like blood across the white tiles. Michael gripped his throat, gasping for air. His knees hit the ground hard. Guests screamed as the powerful billionaire doubled over, his body shaking with violent tremors. Thick white foam began to leak from the corners of his mouth. "Michael!" Vanessa shrieked, rushing to his side. She fell to her knees, her face a mask of pure terror. "Everyone move back. Give him air," Dr. Vera Coleman shouted. She pushed through the panicked guests and knelt beside Michael. She quickly checked his pulse while his eyes rolled back into his head. "This looks like poisoning. Call an ambulance now." The ballroom turned into a scene of total chaos. People were running for the exits, and security guards were shouting into their radios. Outside, the wail of sirens cut through the night. Within minutes, paramedics burst through the gold doors. They lifted Michael's limp body onto a stretcher and raced toward the waiting ambulance. At the hospital, the hallway was a blur of bright lights and white coats. Doctors and nurses scrambled around Michael's bed in the emergency room. Machines beeped loudly, signaling that his heart was struggling to beat. Dr. Coleman emerged from the trauma room, looking exhausted and grim. Her surgical gown was stained, and her hands were trembling slightly. She walked over to Vanessa and Daniel, who were sitting together in the waiting area. Daniel had his arm around Vanessa's shoulder, whispering words of comfort to her. "How is he?" Daniel asked, his voice shaking with emotion. "Please tell us he's going to make it." Dr. Coleman shook her head slowly. "It's bad. The poison is extremely aggressive. His kidneys and liver are already starting to fail. We are doing everything we can, but he only has a 10% chance of surviving the night." Vanessa buried her face in her hands, sobbing loudly. Daniel held her tighter, looking toward the closed hospital doors with a dark, unreadable expression. Michael Brooke, the man who ruled the city, was now just a heartbeat away from death. The hospital waiting room was cold and smelled of bleach. Vanessa Brooke sat on a plastic chair, her face buried in her hands. To anyone walking by, she looked like a grieving wife. Her shoulders shook as if she were sobbing, but behind her palms, her eyes were dry and sharp. "Vanessa," a voice whispered. She looked up. Daniel Hayes was standing over her. He glanced around the hallway to make sure no doctors or bodyguards were watching. He sat down next to her, leaning in close. "The doctor said 10%, Daniel said, his voice barely audible. "That is not zero, Vanessa. He is still breathing." Vanessa straightened her back. The sadness vanished from her face instantly. She looked at the heavy double doors that led to the intensive care unit. Inside that room, Michael was hooked up to dozens of tubes, fighting for every breath. "He is strong, Daniel." "Too strong," Vanessa replied. Her voice was cold like ice. "A 10% chance is 10% too much. We cannot afford for him to wake up. If he opens his eyes and remembers the taste of that wine, we are both dead." Daniel gripped the arms of his chair. His knuckles were white. It was supposed to finish him at the party. Now the police are asking questions, and Dr. Coleman is watching those machines like a hawk. Vanessa turned to him. A small, cruel smile played on her lips. "Dr. Coleman can watch the machines, but she cannot watch everything. Michael thinks he is surrounded by friends. He thinks he is safe in this hospital." She reached into her small silk purse and pulled out a heavy envelope. She didn't open it, but the thick shape of cash was obvious. "I have already spoken to someone on the night shift," Vanessa whispered. "Michael's heart is weak. It wouldn't take much to tip the scales. A little extra medicine in his drip, and the billionaire boss will finally be at peace." Daniel nodded slowly, a dark look in his eyes. They both looked toward the ICU doors. The man who had treated them like family was dying just a few feet away, and they were already planning how to bury him. The next morning the hospital was quiet, but the air felt heavy. Michael Brooke was still hooked up to his machines, his heart beating slowly. Outside his room, A man in a sharp gray suit stood waiting. This was Jonathan Reed, Michael's loyal lawyer and the only person who knew every secret of the Brooke empire. Vanessa approached him, her high heels clicking loudly on the hard floor. She looked tired, but her eyes were searching Jonathan's face for an answer. Daniel Hayes stood a few steps behind her, watching the exchange. "Jonathan," Vanessa said, her voice soft and shaky. "The doctors say there is almost no hope. Michael's organs are failing. We need to think about the future. The business is in chaos, and the assets need to be protected." Jonathan adjusted his glasses and looked at her. His face was like stone. "I understand your concern, Vanessa. But Michael is still alive." Vanessa stepped closer, lowering her voice. "He is barely breathing. As his wife, I should have control over his accounts. There are bills to pay and people to handle. Surely there is a way to sign the papers now. I could make sure you are very well taken care of for your help." Jonathan's eyes narrowed. He had worked for Michael for 20 years, and he knew a bribe when he heard one. The way Vanessa was rushing to grab the money felt wrong. It didn't feel like grief. It felt like greed. "My instructions are very clear," Jonathan replied calmly. "I am the only one with the keys to Michael's private wealth. I will not release a single dollar, and I will not show you the will until he is officially confirmed dead." Not a minute before. Vanessa's face tightened. The fake sadness in her eyes was replaced by a flash of pure anger. "You are being difficult, Jonathan. I am his wife. I am the one who will be in charge when he is gone." "Then you will have to wait," Jonathan said, crossing his arms. "Until then, I am staying right here. I want to make sure nothing else happens to my client." He stared directly at her, and for a moment Vanessa looked away. Jonathan Reed didn't have proof yet, but he knew one thing for sure. He didn't trust the woman standing in front of him. Another night passed in the hospital, but the air felt even heavier. The only sound in Michael's private room was the steady, rhythmic hiss of the ventilator. Outside, the sun was rising, but for Michael Brooke, the world remained dark. Dr. Vera Coleman stood over his bed, staring at the monitor. Her brow was furrowed in deep thought. According to the medical charts, Michael should have shown some sign of improvement by now. The doctors had treated the poison in his system, yet his heart rate was dropping again. "I don't understand it," she whispered to a younger doctor standing nearby. "His vitals were stabilizing 2 hours ago. Now his oxygen levels are falling for no reason. It's like his body has stopped fighting." She checked the clear plastic tubes connected to Michael's arm. Everything looked normal, but something felt very wrong. Dr. Coleman had a bad feeling in her gut, a feeling that something was interfering with her patient. While the doctors were busy at the foot of the bed, Vanessa stood by the window. She was watching the hallway through the glass door. She saw a young nurse with a pale face walking toward the room. The nurse looked nervous, her eyes darting left and right. As the nurse passed the window, Vanessa caught her eye. Vanessa didn't say a word. She simply gave a slow, sharp nod. It was a silent command. The nurse gripped her clipboard tighter and ducked her head, disappearing into the shadows of the medicine room. Vanessa turned back to the bed, her face becoming a mask of fake sadness once again. She walked over and touched Michael's cold, limp hand. To the doctors, she looked like a loyal wife praying for a miracle. In reality, she was waiting for the end. Suddenly, a loud alarm began to blare from the heart monitor. The green line on the screen turned into jagged, frantic peaks. "He's crashing," Dr. Coleman shouted, grabbing a syringe. "His blood pressure is bottoming out. Get the crash cart in here now." The room exploded into movement as nurses rushed in. Michael's body lurched under the sheets, his life slipping away faster than anyone expected. Through the noise and the panic, Vanessa stood perfectly still, watching the heart monitor with a cold, steady gaze. While the rich and powerful fought over Michael's empire, Nina was just trying to survive her shift. Nina was a young, dark-skinned woman who worked as a cleaner at the hospital. She was also a part-time student, studying late into the night after her long hours of scrubbing floors and emptying trash. Her back ached, but she kept a gentle smile on her face. To most of the doctors, she was invisible. To the patients, she was just a shadow in a blue uniform. But Nina saw everything. She pushed her cleaning cart into Michael's private room. The machines were humming quietly again after the morning scare. Nina looked at the man in the bed. She didn't know he was a dangerous mafia boss or a billionaire. To her, he just looked like a lonely soul who had lost everyone. "Hang in there, Mr. Brooke," Nina whispered as she wiped down the side table. She noticed a small photo placed beside the bed, a woman and 3 children. "They are waiting for you to wake up. Don't give up yet." She adjusted his blanket with a kind, steady hand. She didn't have money to give, but she had plenty of compassion. As Nina moved to the hallway to mop near the medicine closet, she heard hushed, angry voices. She stepped back into the shadows of a large equipment cart. "You were supposed to finish it during the crash," Vanessa hissed. Her voice was no longer soft and grieving. It was sharp like a razor. "The doctor was right there," a younger woman replied, sounding terrified. It was the pale nurse Nina had seen earlier. "If I had injected the second dose then, Dr. Coleman would have seen the needle. I need more time." "Time is something we don't have," Vanessa snapped. "The lawyer is watching the door like a hawk. Do it tonight when the shift changes. I want him gone by morning, or you won't get a cent of that money." Nina held her breath, her heart hammering against her ribs. She didn't understand all the medical talk, but she understood the word gone. She looked at the expensive silk dress Vanessa was wearing and then back toward Michael's room. Something terrible was happening in the dark corners of this hospital. Nina was just a poor cleaner with no power, but she knew she couldn't just walk away. As Vanessa walked past her with a cold, stone-faced expression, Nina realized that Michael Brooks' greatest enemy wasn't the poison. It was the woman who claimed to love him. The hospital was very quiet during the midnight shift. The only light in Michael's room came from the glowing blue and green screens of the heart monitors. Outside in the hallway, Nina was slowly mopping the floor. Her heart was still racing from the conversation she had overheard earlier. She kept her eyes on the door to Michael's room, her pulse drumming in her ears. Nina stepped out slowly from behind her cart. Her hands were still shaking. The nurse walked toward the ICU wing, her head lowered. Nina followed at a distance. When she reached Michael's room, she saw Dr. Vera standing near the doorway, studying a chart. Nina opened her mouth to speak, but fear held her back. What if the doctor didn't believe her? Before she could say anything, the nurse slipped quietly past them and entered the room. She wasn't carrying a food tray or a chart. She was hiding something in the pocket of her white uniform. Nina's eyes widened. She felt a cold chill run down her spine. She stopped mopping. She stood frozen, clutching her broom. She knew she had to do something. Inside the room, the nurse's hands were shaking. She pulled out a small glass vial and a sharp needle. She looked at Michael, who lay still as a statue. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice trembling. "But I need the money." She reached for the clear plastic tube that led directly into Michael's vein. She began to press the needle into the rubber port of the 4-line. "Stop right there," a voice boomed. The nurse jumped, nearly dropping the syringe. Dr. Vera Coleman stood in the doorway, her coat flying behind her. She had never actually left the hospital. Her suspicion had kept her in the parking lot, and her gut feeling had brought her back upstairs just in time. "What are you doing with that syringe?" Dr. Coleman demanded, stepping into the room. "That medication is not on his chart." I was just..." the nurse stammered, backing away. Her face turned as white as her uniform. Nina appeared in the doorway behind the doctor. "I saw her," Nina cried out, her voice loud and brave. "I saw her talking to the wife. They were planning this." The nurse panicked. She turned to run toward the door, but Dr. Coleman grabbed her arm. "Security! I need security in room 402 now," the doctor shouted into her radio. Two heavy-set security guards burst into the room seconds later. They grabbed the nurse's arms, and the glass vial shattered on the floor. The smell of chemicals filled the air. The nurse began to sob, her knees hitting the ground. "It wasn't my idea. Vanessa Brooke paid me. She told me I would be in serious trouble if I didn't do it." Dr. Coleman looked at the shattered glass and then at Nina. She realized that Michael wasn't just fighting a sickness. He was fighting a murder plot. The doctor looked toward the waiting room where Vanessa was pretending to sleep. The trap was closing, and the truth was finally coming to light. The quiet hospital hallway was suddenly filled with a heavy thud of boots. 4 police officers marched toward Michael's room, their silver badges flashing under the bright lights. In the center of the room, the nurse was still on her knees, sobbing into her hands. "She made me do it," the nurse shrieked as the officers reached for their handcuffs. She pointed a trembling finger toward the waiting area. "Vanessa Brooke gave me the poison. She said her husband had to die tonight." Dr. Vera Coleman stood tall, holding the medical chart like a shield. She looked at the lead officer. "I caught her trying to inject something into Mr. Brooks' foreline. This woman just admitted it was a murder plot." The police turned toward the waiting room. Vanessa and Daniel were sitting together, looking pale and nervous. When they saw the officers approaching, Vanessa stood up, smoothing her expensive red dress. "What is the meaning of this?" Vanessa asked, her voice high and fake. "My husband is dying. How dare you disturb us at a time like this?" "Vanessa Brooke, you are under arrest for the attempted murder of Michael Brooke," the officer said, pulling out his handcuffs. Vanessa's face twisted in anger. "That is a lie. That nurse is crazy. I would never hurt my husband." But Daniel Hayes wasn't as brave. When he saw the cold steel of the handcuffs, his face turned gray. He began to back away, his eyes darting toward the exit. "It was her idea," Daniel shouted, his voice cracking. "She said we could have the money. She said Michael was already a walking ghost. Don't pin this on me." "Daniel, shut up," Vanessa screamed, turning on her partner. The officers didn't wait. They grabbed Vanessa's arms and snapped the cuffs onto her wrists. The clicking sound echoed through the hallway. For the first time, the powerful woman of the Brooke Empire looked small and defeated. As they were led away in front of the hospital staff, Nina stood by her cleaning cart, watching in silence. She felt a shiver of relief. The people who thought they were untouchable were finally being dragged into the light. Justice had arrived, but inside the room, Michael Brooke remained as still as stone. The villains were gone, but the battle for his life was only beginning. Days turned into weeks at the hospital. The dark clouds of the murder plot had finally cleared. Vanessa and Daniel were locked away, waiting for their trial. Without the constant drip of poison, Michael's body began to do something remarkable. It began to heal. Dr. Vera Coleman walked into the room one sunny morning. She checked the monitors and smiled. For the first time in a month, Michael's heart was beating strongly on its own. His organs were recovering, and the machines that helped him breathe were finally turned off. "He's a fighter," the doctor whispered to Nina, who was quietly mopping the corner of the room. "He should be opening his eyes any day now." Nina nodded, her heart full of hope. Every day after her shift, she stayed for a few minutes just to talk to him. She told him about the birds outside and the bright blue sky. She treated him like a human being, not just a billionaire patient. One afternoon, while the room was gold with sunlight, Michael's hand suddenly moved. His fingers twitched against the white sheets. Nina dropped her cloth and rushed to the bedside. "Mr. Brooke," she whispered. Michael's eyes fluttered open. He blinked against the light, his vision blurry. He saw the hospital ceiling and then a kind, dark-skinned face looking down at him. "Where am I?" His voice was raspy and weak. Dr. Coleman rushed in and explained everything. She told him about the wine, the betrayal by his wife and best friend, and the arrest. Michael listened in silence, his heart aching with the weight of the truth. He had lost his family 10 years ago, and now he had lost the people he thought he could trust. Then the doctor pointed to Nina. And this is Nina. She is the one who heard them talking. She helped save your life. Michael looked at Nina. He saw her simple blue uniform and the kindness in her eyes. He remembered the soft voice that had talked to him while he was in the dark. He realized that while his friends tried to kill him for money, this stranger had protected him for nothing in return. He reached out and weakly touched Nina's hand. "Thank you," he breathed. "You stayed when everyone else wanted me gone." Nina smiled, tears of joy in her eyes. "I just knew you weren't finished yet, sir." Michael looked out the window at the city he used to rule. He didn't care about the power or the billions anymore. He had been given a second chance at life. For the first time in a decade, the billionaire felt truly free. A new chapter was beginning, and this time he wouldn't be walking alone. Thank you for watching. Hit that subscribe button so you do not miss out in any of my videos.